Well, thank you for the introduction, William. I'm going to speak about a project we've had funded by the European Union, the acronym of which is ICE4, and the full title is Increasing Sustainability of European Forests, in which we modelled for security against invasive pests and pathogens, including climate change scenarios. We all love forests. They give us so much in terms of wood products, building materials, foods, fruit and mushrooms, for instance, or hunting pleasures for some people. There's wildlife there, but also a lot of pleasure. These landscapes are beautiful, in my opinion. Some people may disagree, but I don't think many. But it isn't only the wilderness forests that we see here that we're interested in, of course. It's also the trees in our immediate human environment, so the trees in cities. And we need healthy trees to maintain a healthy environment and also to maintain healthy lives for people and for other animals that live in these environments. What we're seeing now, though, all too frequently, is severe damage to areas in forests, such as some of these examples I'm going to show now. A large area of trees. Every single tree in this area is dying. Millions of trees in total. Another view at a beach. We don't want to see lots and lots of dead trees around the beach as we're trying to enjoy ourselves. Or patches in the forest where it looks as if a fire's gone through. It wasn't a fire here, it was a serious root disease that killed all these trees and many, many thousands of others in this particular region of the world. And again, in South America, this image was taken showing plantations of pine that are being very severely damaged by an invasive organism, which brings me to the next slide of what goes wrong. What we're seeing here is problems caused by alien invasive species. And these are pests or pathogens that are inadvertently moved from where they co-evolved with their host plants, which may be trees or shrubs or other plants, and they were moved from that region to somewhere where they were previously unknown and did not co-evolve with the native plants. And the outcome of these invasions sometimes is the development of disease or pest epidemics that threaten the continued existence of the new ecosystem that the organism has been moved to, or certainly damage to certain plant species within them. And then when those plants are damaged, of course, there's a host of other organisms dependent on those plants, which can be very badly affected too. Some may go extinct. I have a few examples here, classic examples, which demonstrate how this effect occurs. Chestnut blight was first reported in the Bronx Zoological Garden in New York in 1904. The pathogen that causes the blight is native to China and Japan, where it's co-evolved with the chestnut species there, and they tolerate the infection. Unfortunately, North American chestnuts and indeed European sweet chestnut do not tolerate the infection particularly well. So by 20 years later, just a little over 20 years later, the disease had spread throughout the native range of North American chestnut down the eastern side of North America. And by 1940, almost all American chestnut trees were dead. And the numbers that are quoted for being killed vary, but a figure of around 8 billion trees seems to be quoted quite frequently. And the disease established in Italy in the 1930s, and it continues to spread in Europe. In fact, it's very recently established in the south of Britain. And we wait to see what will happen with it next. Dutch elm disease is quite a well-known example of the invasive pathogen. It's almost certainly native to Asia, but it got into Europe initially in Britain, but also spreading from the east into Europe at the same time as coming in to the west of Europe on timber imported from North America. Another very problematic example is white pine blister rust, which is native to Asia, Eurasia, probably. It spread into Europe in the 19th century when it killed many of the 5-needle pines from North America that were then growing very nicely in Europe, producing what was destined to be very good quality timber. Those plantations were killed. At the end of the 19th century, the organism was inadvertently carried to North America, where there are huge forests dominated by 5-needle pines, and it continues to spread there and is threatening some species with extinction. And this is a map which shows some examples of pathogen invasions, particularly pathogens that affect tree species in Europe. Most of the examples I show you there are either bacteria or true fungi. Dutch elm disease, ash dieback, which is very much in the press in the UK at the moment, they have true fungi. I also include the pine wilt nematode, which Hugh Evans speaks about. And in addition to those, there are also a lot of species of Phytophthora. You see the name at the bottom right of this slide. And that there are many, many species of Phytophthora that are causing huge problems in particular areas in Europe. And why is this problem accelerating? We've known about the problem for many years, but it seems that more and more alien invasive pests and pathogens are coming into Europe now. We have the global trade in plants, and I will illustrate later why this is the most important pathway through which these pests and pathogens come into Europe. Once the plants are in Europe from elsewhere in the world, there's also the increasing trade between nurseries. The production nurseries tend to specialize nowadays. So a nursery may produce small plants, say in 9 centimeter or 7 centimeter pots, and they send those small cuttings or seedlings onto other nurseries, which then pot them into bigger pots and grow them on. So they may be finished in 2-liter, 3-liter, 5-liter pots, and then they are sold to retail, to landscape, and so on, taking with them any organisms that are in the soil. We also have much better methods to detect and identify these organisms at a very, very fine scale. To some extent, it's recognition that the problem exists. So people are reporting damage that they see to plants, including shrubs and trees, more. And then there's the compounding factor of climate change, which is increasing the latitudes at which some of these pests and pathogens can survive and even thrive. The global trade in plants has been partly fueled by the ability to carry plants fairly quickly from the producing areas, which may be on other continents, maybe on the other side of the planet, into the markets where they are required. So here on this slide I show an image of a ship towards the top left, this ship was called the Clifford J. Rogers, and it was launched in Seattle in 1955. Why is it particularly noteworthy? Because it was arguably the first container ship built. Now, containers had been used in many industries before. In coal mining, for instance, they would have containers to bring the coal out of the mines. But in this case, the Clifford J. Rogers was carrying various goods from Seattle into Alaska and bringing ores of various minerals back from Alaska to Seattle. Nowadays, 60 years on, we have ships that carry standardized size containers. They're not all the same size, but they are of standard sizes. Some of these ships can carry 14,500 shipping containers, and it's estimated that there's some 17 million containers in use globally at any one time. So any of those containers might contain consignments of plants, say, being shipped from China, Australasia, towards Europe, and that will take 7-10 days. The plants will be stressed in there, and they'll become even more susceptible to any organisms that they're carrying on the soil in which they grow. And then they reach the nurseries in Europe. Now, once the plant's gone through the quarantine system at the borders of Europe, it becomes a European plant, and it's often very difficult to determine precisely where it came from in the world. So here's a large nursery full of containerized shrubs, thousands and thousands of shrubs, and I know for certain that this particular nursery was supplying customers in the west of Europe, further north from where it's situated in Poland to the south, and also further to the east in Russia. So any pathogens on these particular plants will be sent all over in that sense. As humans, we don't like to wait for things. We have, here I put it as an obsession with instant landscapes. So at the top, there's a nursery selling heavily pruned topiary trees for particular landscape settings. Further down, we see some olive trees on the left. Olive trees in large multi-sided containers. Now, olive trees will take heavy pruning of the roots and the tops. So it doesn't look too bad. The olive trees are at a nursery in Italy. But those olive trees were dug up from a site, and they will then be sold on to someone who wants instant trees. Now, as it turns out, these particular olives were dug up from a building site, a newly designated building area in Turkey, shipped across to Italy, and then pruned into shape and planted in these boxes. So whatever was on the roots in Turkey has come with them. But possibly worse than that, they were actually bought by a landscaping company in China. So after being grown like this in Italy for a year or two maybe, they were then transported by sea to China, where they were used in a landscaping environment. And of course, any of us can go on the web now and order plants from probably anywhere in the world. So we can get potted plants, we can get bare root plants, we can buy seed, and seed can contain pests and pathogens as well. And I would suspect that there's very little control, very little inspection of any of these things as they come into Europe from elsewhere in the world. To the project ICE4, a very grand aim here was to generate robust evidence to inform policy development for forest management against risks from alien invasive pests and pathogens in relation to climate change. And then we have a series of aims that were specific to the project itself, increasing knowledge on alien species and to generate improved methods for phytosanitary authorities to detect and diagnose pests and pathogens in plant consignments entering Europe. Now, there's a lot of additional work that goes into fulfilling those aims, apart from what becomes obvious from just simply reading them. So we were a project with 16 partners, so quite a large group involved. We had 13 science partners, which included the University of Aberdeen, me here in the Institute of Biological and Environmental Sciences. We had the Swedish University of Agricultural Sciences, SLU. We had the University of Neuchâtel in Switzerland, the University of Tuscia in Italy, and also the Institute for Plant Protection in Firenze in Italy. Forest Research Institute of Warsaw, very active, and the Free University of Brussels. In addition, the University of Eastern Finland in Joensuu, INRA in France, CAB International, although the headquarters in Britain, the CAB International partners were based in Switzerland, and we had a Russian partner from St. Petersburg, a Forest Technology Academy, a Chinese partner from the Chinese Academy of Sciences, and we also had the University of Life Sciences in Vienna. For the non-science partners, we had owners, so extension organizations, but very much either pan-European or, in the case of the program for the endorsement of forest certification schemes, global in their reach. So European State Forest Association and the Confederation of European Forest Owners, in addition to PEFC. And these people gave us direct lines to informing the stakeholder community. So the project started in September 2010 and ended in February of this year. We divided the work into 6 work packages, the first of which was project management, so there's nothing more on that to come, but that was all done from Aberdeen. And we had defining the threats. This is largely database work, of building up databases to show what's out there, what might head our way. We had development of molecular methods to detect invasive organisms. Work package 4 was a critical analysis of the plant trade coming into Europe. Work package 5 was focused on the climate change, so the development of models to predict spread and impacts of alien invasive pests with climate change. And then work package 6 was focused on how we get the information out to the stakeholder community and to science in general. So, if we consider work package 2 first, invasions with time is one of the things that's been shown, and this work's been published. So we can see from the bar chart here that the number of true fungi, which are labeled blue and orange on the bar chart, has increased with time since about 1800. It's rather difficult to tell what was happening before about 1860 to 1890 because of the work of Pasteur had yet to be performed and accepted by the community. But nevertheless, we know of several pathogens that were probably introduced into Europe in the early 19th century, certainly several in the 1830 to 1859 category as well. But you can see from this graph that the numbers of Ascomycota, the blue bar, gets higher and higher with time, and also the yellow bar, which are from a group of organisms called Oomycota that are not actually true fungi, but they are rather like fungi in terms of ecology. They are increasing rapidly as well at the moment. Where are these things coming from? Well, we have a whole range of places to choose from here, but you can see there that we have Europe listed. So why is that a problem? Because some pathogens and pests are native in one part of Europe and yet have been able to spread through the activity of humans to other parts of Europe. So that's how they become invasive. A lot of pests and pathogens have come from Africa and from North America in the past. And what we're now seeing really is an upsurge in the numbers coming from Asia, which is evident from that graph. And slightly clearer in this sense, this splits into pests and pathogens, not just pathogens here. So the number of species of pests coming in, you can see many, over 30, over 35 from Asia, and about 40 from North America. And also pathogens, we don't know from any of these where they come from. Certainly some are from North America, some are from Asia. In work package 3 then, we were looking at generating diagnostic methods and data for poorly characterized pathogens such as the Ceratocystis fimbriata complex. That's actually many different species, many of which again seem to be extremely damaging on a wide range of crops, some of them on trees. And in fact, one of the ones that was focused on in that complex was Ceratocystis platani, which kills plane trees, platanus. Very common trees in cities in Western Europe, and also the oriental plane is native in Greece and is now being attacked and killed by Ceratocystis platani. We also generated a lot of molecular data for the oomycetes. These are the things that aren't true fungi, so Phytophthora and Pythium. Often root diseases and very serious damage can result from those. And a lot of insects were included in the work. Now we use techniques including multilocus sequence typing and microsatellite marker typing, and they can give you an idea of the precise species that's present, but also which genotype of the species without going as far as reading the whole genome of the organism. So a relatively rapid way of assessing what species are present. And because high throughput sequencing technologies like 454 sequencing and Illumina sequencing became available shortly before the start of the project, we made a modification in the contract so that we could include this sort of work in ICE4. And here we have a dying plane in Firenze in Italy. So with the molecular data, they were able to differentiate the species, Platani from other species within the Fimbriata complex, and also actually individual genotypes of the pathogen. They managed to increase the sensitivity of detection several-fold compared to previous reports, and they also applied the method to detect spread of the pathogen in the atmosphere near infected trees in Firenze using very simple spore traps. And the pathogen does tend to spread from trees that are being pruned and felled because they've been affected by the disease to adjacent trees that weren't affected before. And the high throughput sequencing technologies were split between several groups in the science part of the work. So the Swedish group, SLU, used 454 technology to monitor forest pathogens in spore traps in pine forests. Now, what this system will allow is the detection of any pathogens and arguably pests too that appear in their forests long before we can see any damage from those organisms. The University of Tuscia, Tuscany, focused on communities of Phytophthora and Pythium in forest and chestnut orchard soils, and were rather surprised to find evidence that certain Phytophthora species, which they couldn't otherwise find, seemed to be present in the soils in these orchards. So there's a threat there which wasn't detected using previously available methods. And the University of Neuchâtel developed very general primers to examine the broad range of higher organisms that are present in soils. Not only in soils, though, because in collaboration with us here at Aberdeen, University of Neuchâtel, we used these techniques to examine the potential of migratory birds to vector eukaryotic organisms. So a potential alternative method for alien invasive pests and pathogens to be carried. And the French group and the Vienna people focused on pests from European species of trees and shrubs planted in China. There's more on that later about the sentinel species. In work package 4, there was a certain amount of quantifying of the pathways in general. And it was obvious from the work that the most likely pathway of introduction of alien invertebrate pests and of pathogens into Europe was through the living plants pathway. So plants raised on another continent and shipped into Europe, usually by sea, sometimes by air. And it was amazing to see the numbers of plants imported into Europe. So you can see from these 3 small tables, also on this slide, that the number of plants imported into Italy was around 140 million per year in various groups of plants. And then into the Netherlands was way over that, approaching 200 million plants a year. And just for Antwerp Harbour, we're looking at over 40 million plants a year in many, many different species. So there's a lot of planting trade between Europe and other continents. And again, here we see how this market has changed in about a 10-year period from 1995 to 2010. So we could say that from North America, or at least the USA and Canada, the imports were more or less stable. Between Australia, New Zealand, and Europe, the import numbers were fairly stable. But there's a very, very steep increase in the number of plants coming from Asia. It isn't just China. We're thinking Vietnam, Thailand, Cambodia, and so on. Now, within Work Package 4, we also set up what we term sentinel nurseries. These are parts of nurseries in China, in this instance, that were set aside to raise plants that were frequently exported to Europe from those nurseries. So we had species of maple, Acer box, which is Buxus, ash, which is Fraxinus, holly, which is Ilex, and Zelkova has no common name, but it's related to elm. So these were planted in areas of the nurseries that were set aside from the normal routine practices, and they were planted there to see what pests and pathogens would affect them whilst they were in those nurseries, and therefore might potentially be then carried to Europe when the plants are exported. And we can see here in the bar charts that many, many insects were found in the 2 nurseries on these particular plants. And these are numbers of new species that they're finding, species that were not necessarily known on those plants in the past, and so probably wouldn't be looked for in the quarantine procedures that are applied in Europe before the plants are allowed in. So a lot of organisms on these plants, and this is a dangerous situation. Some of these organisms, to be fair, were on the foliage and might be lost because it's unlikely that they would transport these particular plants when they had foliage on them. However, there are also many pathogens on the roots as well, and these could all come in with the plants when they're imported into Europe. So that system is something that we see being expanded in the near future to use sentinel nurseries, and there's also a scheme now which is developing sentinel plantings in other situations, such as in arboreta on other continents, and in parks and gardens, botanic gardens particularly. And they are developing links between these particular plant display areas, if you like, which will enable this information to be exchanged widely globally. In the modeling section, the cellular automaton model was used to incorporate both time and space into predicting pest and pathogen spread in Europe. And because this is a lot of work, we focused on just a number of organisms, including the pinewood nematode, which is the subject of reframe, ash dieback, Hymenocystis fraxineus, the alder Phytophthora, pine pitch canker, something that's in northern Spain and in Portugal at the moment, and is likely to spread in Europe with time in the near future. Also on needle blight of pines, which is caused by 2 species of Dophystroma, on the emerald ash borer, which we know is approaching the border of the EU now, heading our way from western Russia, and on the Siberian moth, which is also coming in from northern Russia. So here's an example of what the output is from the modeling maps, something we can generally understand fairly easily. So for the Dophystroma needle blight, we can see on the left the status in 2007. The red areas are where the disease was already causing a lot of damage in pine forests. So in the Iberian Peninsula, south of France, and one or two other areas in southern and central Europe. But also there are places in the UK where it was causing major problems that don't really show up at this magnification very well. By 2030, so 15 years' time, you can see that those red areas are spread. And also the green areas where the problem is present are spread rather alarmingly into Scandinavia and Finland. And these are the things that the authorities there will look at and will take notice of and try to take action on. Another example was with the Siberian moth. So this mapping from the University of Vienna shows where climatically suitable areas for the moth occur in Europe. So on the present accepted models of climate, so they're the top 2, EOBS, which is a European observation system, and Aladdin. We show that the areas where Siberian moth is spread include Russia, Finland, and across into Sweden and a little bit in Norway. Now, in some contrast to the maps I've just shown of Dophystroma, we can see that the changes in climate predicted for between 2021 and 2050 or 2071 onwards would suggest that the Siberian moth will somewhat retract from Europe. The areas where the climate is suitable for it to develop will be less than they are now. So that's possibly some good news. And the final work package in the list was dissemination, and we had a very active consortium in this. We have a website that's still running. The URL is given here. Over the 3.5 years, we published over 100 papers in peer-reviewed scientific journals from this work, and there are more papers that are being published now too. We had 250 meeting proceedings papers. That's very good numbers for these things. Some of the meetings, the presentations would have included oral presentations, sometimes poster presentations, but still papers in the proceedings of these meetings. We had 41 articles in the popular press, which go out to interested public, which go out to stakeholders. So again, a very useful way of disseminating information. And overall, the dissemination occurred in 22 countries. Now, that doesn't include the peer-reviewed and the conference proceedings, because they could be seen anywhere in the world, really. There are also a lot of radio and television interviews with some of us. So the work in ICE4 was mentioned on the radio many times and on the television a few times in several countries. Now, to actually focus on the stakeholder groups for the work, we held 2 project workshops, one in Brussels in February 2012, and there were over 40 delegates at that, many of whom came from plant protection organizations, and they heard talks about ICE4 itself and about equivalent work that was going on in North America and Australia. And then we held a second workshop in eastern Finland, Joensuu, in February of this year, where we had 40 delegates, and again from plant protection organizations. And in that one, they were introduced to the modeling methods and the modeling software, indeed, how to input data, how to interpret the outputs in terms of maps of the models, which was very popular too. The project, of course, was funded largely by the European Union in the 7th Framework Programme. And we all had a very good time in it, in terms of the science, in terms of the work, and in terms of getting to know a lot of different people around Europe.